They found Sherry covered with bruises, dried blood, and she actually had been chained up. So this is Sherry Papini. And when Sherry was in only 7th grade, she ended up meeting her future husband, Keith Papini. But it wasn't a straight shot to marriage for them. They actually broke up a few times. And in fact, Sherry ended up getting married to another guy in 2006. But things started to go sour in that relationship pretty quickly. And Sherry ended up starting to talk to Keith again. And it wasn't until 8 months later that her divorce with David was finalized. But Sherry and Keith were really happy to be reconnected. And in 2009, they had this big fairy tale wedding. And on the outside, they really looked like the perfect couple. So fast forward a bit to 2016, and at this point, they already have 2 kids together. Sherry was a full-time mom who took being a mom very seriously. So in the fall of that year, 2016, Sherry was starting to run again because she was training for a turkey trot type of run for Thanksgiving. So November 2nd, 2016, completely normal day. Keith says goodbye to Sherry, gives her a kiss, says goodbye to his children, and heads off to work. Just before 11 a.m., Sherry had texted Keith and asked if he would be coming home for lunch that day. And he responded to her and said, no, sorry, busy day. The kids were at daycare during this time, which is nice for Sherry because she is just home. So she took this time to run. And at 11 a.m., she put on her pink running jacket and headed out. Whenever she went out jogging, she normally went on the same trail in her neighborhood, which was about a mile away from her house. As she ran, she entered a remote area in Mountain View, California, near Old Oregon Trail and Sunrise Drive. And she's just running along like normal, and then suddenly someone had thrown a bag over her head. Before she knew it, she was being pulled into a dark SUV. There were 2 people abducting her, and one of them had a gun. They put her in the car, and she's gone like that. So later that day, Keith comes home from work like normal around 4:30 p.m. He says that normally his wife and his kids actually come to the door to greet him every day, and they have a big family cuddle session. He pulled out his phone and opened up the Find Friends app to see if he could figure out where she was that way. So her phone ends up pinging over near their mailbox, which is actually over a mile from their house, which is kind of crazy. So he gets in the car and drives there as quick as he can, hoping to find her and the kids just checking the mail. When he fails to locate her, he goes ahead and calls 911. Keith said that he thought it was possible that she could have just lost her cell phone, but it was really getting to him that the children hadn't been picked up from daycare yet. The police came to his house and immediately started the search. Keith was very distraught during this time. He was very concerned about his wife. He made several public pleas, and 24 hours turned into 48 hours without her, and 48 hours then turned into 72. Pretty soon this case actually made it to national and international headlines, which is huge. There was a massive search for Sherry. Federal, state, and local authorities all were involved. Even though so many members of the community came to search for her and spent hours and hours physically looking, there was absolutely nothing found. The police didn't even know where to start. I mean, she was just plucked out of thin air, and no witnesses had seen the car, no one had seen it happen, and eventually this started to really frustrate Keith. He felt like the police could be doing even more than they were, which I don't know. I mean, they had brought so many resources in, like I said, way more than other missing persons cases get. However, eventually Keith started to get so frustrated that he created his own team of friends that could help investigate the case and look for Sherry, and they had their own little meeting room in his house and investigation headquarters, kind of. Keith at this point also started a GoFundMe account so that they could possibly hire a private investigator and fund whatever else that they needed for the search. And at this time, Keith was still working with the police, but the relationship was definitely starting to become a little strained, and the police felt like Keith making so many statements and doing his own investigation could possibly compromise their investigation. And Keith knew that he could be considered a suspect, so he volunteered to take a polygraph test, and he passed it just fine. But one of the reasons why they were still a little suspicious of Keith was because of the way that the phone was found. There were investigators who even looked at it and said that this looks kind of staged. However, a lot of people who knew Keith said that Keith would never do something to his wife. Even Sherry's family came forward and said that they trusted Keith 100%, that there's just no way he would do anything to her. And Keith truly seemed desperate to find his wife. Like, he would do anything. And at one point he even hired a psychic. So after Sherry had been gone for a couple weeks, there was this man visiting the area in California that they lived. He was visiting a friend in town, and he happened to see all of this on TV. He actually saw that recording of Keith sobbing and begging the public to help. He decided to offer what is called a reverse ransom. He put up a $50,000 reward to Sherry's kidnappers for her safe return. But of course, the deal would have to be that she was completely unharmed. And this man actually told the sheriff's office about his plan before he did it. They actually were really hesitant and did not want him to put up this reward. They thought that it could possibly damage the investigation. And Keith was really happy to have him, although he was really hoping for someone to speak publicly and to offer a reward publicly, and this guy wanted to remain anonymous. So this is when he ended up connecting with another guy named Cameron Gamble, and this was through a mutual friend. Cameron is a former pilot in the Air Force and a captivity survival expert. He works from an undisclosed location where he set up 4 large shipping containers to represent different places around the world where people are frequently held hostage. He travels all over the world to aid in negotiation efforts and release hostages and victims of kidnapping. So Cameron and Keith and that anonymous donor meet up to discuss a plan. And Cameron ended up being the face to the media, offering the reward and talking about their demands. And the media, as well as the police, actually criticized Cameron for his involvement in the case. A lot of people thought he was actually being an opportunist, but according to Cameron, he did not do this for his business. He just truly wanted to help Keith and help get Sherry back.
Bring her home.
And what was interesting is he actually gave a 100-hour deadline, which not many people put deadlines on rewards, but when they do, it's so that they can get some results faster and put pressure on the possible to show them that they can't just wait as long as they want to give the person back. Eventually 100 hours passed and nothing came out of it. So the anonymous donor decided to double that amount, and Cameron made another video talking about a $100,000 reward this time. And this was on November 23rd. The next day was November 24th, 2016. It was Thanksgiving morning. That morning, Keith actually had plans to release balloons with the community to help raise awareness about Sherry. But about 4 a.m. that morning, there was this woman named Allison driving with her daughter on the highway, and they happened to see this woman on the side of the road. She was frantic, clearly terrified, trying to flag down someone. And at first glance, Allison knew that something was wrong with this woman. She had dirt all over her face, which ended up being bruises. She could just tell that this woman was highly disturbed and very, very scared. So she continues driving a little bit, pulls over, and just calls 911 from her car. So the police got there, and as you probably guessed, this woman was Sherry Papini. She was about 150 miles from home, and it had been 22 days since she first went missing. EMS said that they found Sherry covered with bruises, dried blood, and she actually had been chained up. Sherry was also very underdressed for November. It was freezing outside, and not only that, she had lost a ton of weight. You could classify her as almost emaciated. Police pulled up security camera footage for a local church, and they actually saw Sherry on video running around frantically trying to flag someone down. In the video, she actually ran up to the church. She ran up to another building as well, I believe a house, before she decided to go back to the road. And she says that she was worried that people weren't pulling over because she had chains, and she thought maybe they thought she had escaped from prison. And she was so upset that she could barely recall what had happened. She could barely speak, and it would be months before she would explain to police what all had happened to her. And this is a natural defense mechanisms that our brain has to deal with trauma. And even though it took a while for Sherry to recall all of the details of what she had been through, Sherry always cooperated fully with the police. So Sherry didn't have any serious injuries. She said that at one point she hurt her foot, but they checked it out and it looked okay. However, she did lose about 15% of her body weight, which is quite a bit in just 22 days. And she did have a bit of a broken nose just on the bridge of her nose. And like I said, her face and her whole body were covered in bruises. And the bruises on her body were not fresh, as in made in the last couple of days. Some of them were, but a lot of them were old and they were kind of layered onto her. And it also looked like she had been bound for quite a long amount of time. She had deep gashes into her neck and marks on her wrist from where she had been bound. And what's really crazy is Sherry actually had a branding on her body. It was on her shoulder, and at this point it had been kind of scabbed over, and there's not any pictures of it or details as to what the branding was of, but that's very, very scary. Not only that, her beautiful blonde hair had been chopped above her shoulders and was all chunky and messed up, which police say oftentimes people who abuse others and want to use them in some way will do this to kind of take away their control or embarrass them or almost steal their identity in a way. Of course, they took DNA samples from Sherry and they found a woman's DNA as well as a man's DNA on her body. So while all of this is happening and Sherry is being examined at the hospital, they start calling Keith and they tell him that Sherry is alive. Keith goes to the hospital as quickly as he can, and when he gets there, an officer kind of embraces him and tells him to be prepared to see her. Sherry actually described her as two Hispanic women who mostly spoke Spanish, so she really didn't know what was going on most of the time. She knew a couple details about them, like one of them had earrings and curly hair that was pulled back into a bun and thin eyebrows, but she said for the most part they covered their faces when they were around her, and a lot of the time they had a bag over Sherry's head. She said one of the women was about 20 to 30 years old and one was older, maybe 40 to 50, but she really had no idea. Police said that for over the 3 weeks that Sherry was gone, she was held in a dirty little cell, and during this time she was treated very, very terribly and was tortured by these women. So why did they let her go? Well, according to Sherry, the day that they let her go, she heard the two women arguing, and then she heard a shot, and then one of the women came in and took her in the car. This woman then took her to County Road 17, and that's where she dumped her off. And as soon as she got up on her feet, she just ran. So of course, it's great that Sherry has now returned home, that she's safe with her kids and her husband. Keith is very, very happy, but the public still had a lot of questions and rumors really began swirling at this point. But the police believed Sherry in the whole situation, and their concern was the fact that there are are still out there. But over time, more and more details have come out, and it has made people question the case even more. So it wasn't until almost a year after her abduction that Sherry was able to pull enough information on her kidnappers for them to create a sketch. The police released these sketches to the public, and they started wondering if this possibly had anything to do with drugs, because there were a lot of meth houses in the area. So they did over 20 search warrants of people's homes. Almost a year after everything had happened, the police ended up releasing more information to the public, because at this point they didn't even know that there was DNA found on Sherry. So that was revealed, as well as a little bit of the evidence from the search warrant that they conducted. And as police released more evidence, things just started to become more confusing, and a lot of people brought up even more questions. People were confused about why there was male DNA on her body when Sherry had said that there were two female abductors. And around this same time, police released some very interesting information. They said that before all of this had happened, Sherry had a texting relationship going on with another man from Detroit, Michigan. And they ended up serving 12 search warrants on this person in Michigan. There's not a lot of details as to why, and I'm sure there is more information out there, but a lot of people in the public started wondering why they even released this information to begin with. Apparently Sherry had known this man for years, and they had just started texting again right around the time of her disappearance. And they kept talking regularly until late October 2016, right before she went missing in November. However, this man was investigated, and according to police, he was cleared of any involvement in Sherry's disappearance. Now, obviously, I've said that there is a lot of public opinion when it comes to this case, of people thinking that it could all be hoaxed, but it's not just people assuming this. There's also some experts that think this as well. In March of 2017, Sacramento Bee published an article that had concerning details about Sherry's past. It said that back in 2000, when Sherry was just a teenager, her sister, Sheila, said that Sherry had tried to break into their house through the back door, but nothing was stolen. And her father, Richard, also said some questionable stuff about her and said that that same day, Sherry had vandalized their house. I mean, if they really thought she was a victim, I don't think they would be saying all of this. In 2003, Richard also reported an unauthorized bank withdrawal to the police, and it ended up being Sherry. At this time, she was only 21 years old, and she did eventually return the money to her father. A few months after this, Sherry's mother, Loretta, had called the police because she said that Sherry had been hurt herself and was threatening to blame her mother for it when the police came. But at the end of the day, these events may not be completely accurate, and they haven't been commented on by Sherry herself. And a lot of people argue that they really have nothing to do with her being kidnapped 10 years later. It's very possible that Sherry was struggling with mental health during those times, and just because someone has mental health issues doesn't mean that they staged a violent crime. The Papini family ended up making a statement for the first time in a while. To this day, Sherry's case is still open and active, and the FBI is still working on it. No one has ever been charged, no one's ever been arrested, and that cash reward is actually still up for grabs. Random people would be taking pictures of her every time that she would leave the house. It's just messed up. The family has gotten so much backlash and hate that they ended up having to move. There's a lot of theories about what could have happened. Obviously, there's a theory that the couple faked this together to get attention. There's a theory that Sherry just faked it, that maybe she wanted to leave her life and, you know, run away with someone else, or just was sick of being a mom. I don't know. But of course, the large majority of people believe that she actually was kidnapped. I'm not sure if this will ever be solved. And that's it for me today, guys. I hope you're all having a great day. Stay safe